See, is there anything else before we jump in? I think we are good to go. So it is my pleasure to introduce Kesley Kant. I think I got that correct this time, who is a research librarian at Davis, Graham, and Stubbs here in Denver, Colorado. So Kelsey, see, I knew I was going to do that. Kesley, I will, I will let you take it away. And once again, if there are any questions as we go through today's session, feel free to put them in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deb. Or thank you, Christine. Hi, Deb and Kat. It's great to have you guys joining me. And Will, since there's just the two of you, any questions at all that you have as we go through would be great. We can spend a little more time focusing on the resources you guys may or may not have, or things that you specifically want to know about state and local legal research if you have any questions. We're going to start by talking about legal authority, and I know that Deb's probably going to be pretty familiar with this, but I was hoping maybe both of you could give some examples of primary legal resources, if you know what those are, in the chat, because that's where we're going to start talking. Okay, awesome. So Deb mentioned the Colorado Revised Statutes and the Colorado Code of Regulations, and those are definitely primary sources of legal authority. Here, one of the things, just the reason I'm starting out with primary versus persuasive sources of legal authority is because if a patron comes to you with just a question about what the law is on a particular topic, it's important to know that the law can come from multiple places and that some things are definitively authoritative, we'll call those primary resources, and some are just other sources that courts take into consideration when making a legal determination, and those are persuasive authority. So primary legal authority includes cases, statutes, regulations, and court rules. Persuasive authority is going to be any other authority from other jurisdictions and authority from secondary sources, and we'll talk about all of those more in a minute. I see that that Christine mentioned court transcripts in the comments, and there is a potential that a court transcript could be primary authority if it's a transcript of a judge's opinion given on the record. In that case, that in your given jurisdiction, that would be primary legal authority, but most of the time a court transcript is not going to be primary authority unless it's specific to that opinion given on the record by a judge. No, I like the wild guess. That's good. And it was partially true. So I also wanted to do just a quick little refresher on the way that laws are made. So this is obviously a little icon of a diagram for the three branches of the federal government, but just as there are three branches of the federal government, there are three branches of state government. We have our legislature with a House of Representatives and a Senate in the state of Colorado. We have the governor's office and supporting agencies, which make up the executive branch, and we have a judicial branch made up of our state courts. And the state court system has district courts, a court of appeals, and a Supreme Court, very similar to the federal system. Also, since we're talking about state and local government also has a very similar breakdown in terms of branches of government. So local municipalities have municipal court systems. They have usually a mayor or a city council that makes up the executive. And the small dichotomy here is that oftentimes those same entities are kind of the legislative body. They're the people who make ordinances in a municipality as well. And we'll talk a little bit about more about that later. But just to keep in mind that there are three branches of government that are making the laws and generating that primary legal authority that we talked about on the last slide. So I don't know. I'm positive that Deb's answer will be yes, but I wondered if, Kat, have you ever used the Colorado Revised Statutes when working with a patron? Cool, great, awesome. It's good to know that Christine has a little bit of background in this as well. So the Colorado Revised Statutes. Oh, very interesting. Okay. Kat's talking about she mostly helps with government services applications and things like that. And so after I talk a little bit about the statutes, I'm going to go back to how you might do some of that kind of research. Some of that is federal level stuff that we'll be talking about in the next session, but there's a lot of stuff that is covered by state statutes and regulations as well. So the Colorado Revised Statutes are printed annually. This started in 1997. So technically the current version of the Colorado Statutes is called the 1973 edition. But that printing continues through to today. So the applicable date is whatever year of the statutes you have that were published. So typically right now it's going to be 2018 Colorado Revised Statutes. And I think that Christine has included a link here that didn't come through perhaps on the slide. So this is the citation for the Colorado Revised Statutes. This is the format. And so if someone presents you with a citation that looks like this, they're looking for a Colorado Revised Statutes, the first number of verse to the title, the second to the article, and the last to the section of that statute. And the books are organized by title. So if you're looking at an actual hard copy book, that's the number that's going to direct you to the book that you need. There are a number of places where you can get free access to state statutes online. Colorado is great because they have access to the statutes for free from Lexis, who is the printer of those texts. And that site is really, really great because it's very user-friendly. It's readily searchable. You can access all kinds of other state court rules and local rules from that site as well. And this hyperlink in the PowerPoint will lead you directly there. If you're looking for other state statutes, the Law Library Society of DC has a great page that lists places to locate state statutes and regulations for every state in the United States and DC. I listed some additional resources here for researching Colorado state statutes. And the I'm sorry, I clicked on your link, Deb, but I'm thinking, okay, I see. I see. Okay, great. I'm sorry. I clicked on your link just to see where that was leading me, and it seems to be opening fine for me as well. So this UCCS Researching Colorado State Statutes Guide is great for giving you some additional direction on how the statutes are broken up, and also doing Colorado legislative history research. So legislative history research is research into how state statutes are created, the history of the language of the statutes. So if you have a patron who comes to you and is looking for information on either what the language of a statute used to be or why certain language was included in a statute, this legislative history guide is really, really helpful, and you'll locate a lot of that information through House and Senate bills and um, committee meeting reports and things like that. And this guide is very useful for digging into that information more in depth. So moving on to, oh, sorry, I left out a poll just out of interest. I wanted to know how many of you were familiar with any of these resources before we started today.
And Deb and Kat, you can kind of click next to the boxes and it'll sort of show us if you are familiar with any of them or have heard of them, or if your library has them. So feel free to click in. It looks like everybody has heard of the LexisNexis, and that I'm guessing probably Deb has heard of the state resources. And I should probably click in. I have heard of, let's see what happens here. So I've heard of LexisNexis. I did not know they had state resources. And yeah, so excellent.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, those two research guides are incredibly helpful. If you ever end up getting a question from a patron and forget everything that we talked about on this presentation, those are two great places to go back and look for the statutes. And I think probably it's going to be most common for public patrons to be asking questions about statutes, especially just general public patrons. But Deb talked a lot about assisting pro se patrons in her presentation last time. And one of the things that they're often going to need to know about are cases as well as statutes. And other patrons may be doing case law research as well. So a pro se patron, someone who's representing themselves in litigation, is probably the most likely patron to need this kind of assistance. But you know, general students doing research may be also interested in case law research, or anyone who's trying to understand the meaning of a particular law might be interested in case law research. And as you'll remember, back on our primary versus persuasive legal authority page, cases are primary legal authority. The United States practices the common law, which means that courts can make law. The things that judges hold in cases are the law, along with statutes and regulations. And so certainly if someone's just asking you what the law is on a question, you're going to want to make them aware that cases are a potential source of information. Case law research can be a bit more challenging. Case law citations, if someone comes to you with an actual case law citation, those come from print reporters where opinions used to be published, and you can now type that citation into a number of different resources. You could type it into Google Scholar. You could type it into any of these Judicia or FindLaw resources that I have. Justicia or FindLaw resources. I'm sorry, that is still a typo there. So you'll find the ability to look up those cases there if they're available. One of the tricky things about free resources for case law is that they're not universally comprehensive. So most lawyers and legal researchers are using one of two paid databases, either Westlaw or Lexis, which I mentioned down here, which are much more comprehensive case law research databases. And I'll talk about a little bit later places where you can direct patrons if they need to do that kind of research. Our local law libraries are a great resource for that. Although they still may have some, depending on where you're going, some limited access to those for public patrons. But all Colorado Supreme Court cases are published online now. Many federal opinions are published online. State court cases, again, like I said, are a little bit more hit or miss even in these paid databases. So if a patron is doing state-specific case law research and they're really trying to delve into it, they're not looking for one case in particular, or they're not just starting out, it might be a good idea to direct them to a law library because of the limited resources that are available for free online, but they are certainly available. Another type of case research that someone might ask you about would be to research the existence of an ongoing case. This is often what we call docket research because cases are docketed with the court. And so if somebody's asking you about researching an ongoing case, the Colorado State Courts actually do have a great online e-filing system. This link will take you there. If they're a pro se patron, they can sign up to do their court filings through that website. But all public patrons can sign up for an account and access certain materials. There is a fee for accessing those materials, and they'll have to provide some additional information about their resource in order to sign up for an account with Colorado Courts e-filing. But that is an option if they're trying to look into ongoing cases. It's also an option to just call the court. They usually have a $10 fee to run a search, and the court can run the search for them if they're looking for cases involving a particular party name, say. Before we get into regulations, are you guys familiar with, or have you had experience using the Colorado Code of Regulations to assist a patron? Awesome. Well, Kat in particular, I'll draw your attention to this because the regulatory agencies that administer public benefits in the state of Colorado all obviously have regulations governing their programs and their administration. So patrons who are coming to you with questions about public benefits or getting services from state agencies may not need to delve into the Colorado Code of Regulations, but it's certainly a possibility, and this is where most of the information governing those agencies' activities would be located. So the Colorado Code of Regulations is all of the regulations created by state executive agencies governing their both their administration of programs and their administration of the laws that they are tasked with implementing. And so a lot of the regulations are about the more minute aspects of implementing programs and laws. All of the regulations are published now on the Colorado Secretary of State website. And from 2007 forward, they've done a really great job of publishing those annually and any information related to rulemakings that go on. So regulations are created through a process called rulemaking, in which the agency publishes a notice in the Colorado Register, and then the public is given an opportunity to participate in that rulemaking. And once a final rule is made, then it's published in the Colorado Code of Regulations. A Colorado Code of Regulations citation looks like this. You've got the volume of the CCR comes first, then there's a number that corresponds to the department, and a second number that corresponds to the agency or division of that department, and then a regulation number following the dash. So if you get a citation that looks like this, it's a citation to the Code of Regulations. You can find those on the Colorado Secretary of State website. You may also find supplemental guidance related to particular regulations on specific agency websites. The Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA, has a great website that collects a lot of guidance documents. So you may find that useful in finding interpretive information as well. This administrative law in Colorado is another research guide that is incredibly useful if you're delving into regulatory research in depth. That same Law Library Society of DC website will provide you with a lot of links to other state regulations online if you're looking for those. I would also just note very briefly, it probably doesn't come up too much for public patrons, but if anyone is trying to do regulatory history research prior to 2007, when all the regulations went online at the Colorado Secretary of State website, you're going to find that that is an incredibly difficult challenge. All prior to them being posted online, they were not published anywhere uniformly. They were just published as a loose leaf update, and many of those loose leaf updates have since gone missing. The most comprehensive set is at the Colorado Supreme Court Law Library. The CU Law Library also has a set, but other than that, the only other option is to contact the agency about historic regulations. There isn't another place, not even at the state archives, that has comprehensive sets of the CCR prior to them being published online. So if a patron comes to you with a question like that, I would highly recommend directing them to either the Supreme Court or CU Law Libraries for further information. Another source of primary law that patrons might be interested in, again, this is probably going to mostly fall on pro se patrons, because they're going to be the ones who would be researching court rules that would apply to them as litigants. However, court rules also apply to people filing things in any type of proceeding or participating in any way. So third parties who are subpoenaed, third parties who are listed as in a potential garnishment proceeding, potential interveners in a case, all are going to be concerned with court rules. Similarly, court rules also, to a certain extent, govern the behavior of parties, attorneys, and judges outside of litigation. So that might be something that would concern someone who's tangentially related to litigation or has some concerns about someone involved in litigation's behavior. I've provided the links here to the Colorado Rules of Civil Procedure, which are printed within the Colorado statutes. I've just provided a list here of a number of the other court rules. Many of these are also available through the same Lexis State Court Resources page that I linked to earlier. Many are also available online. The Supreme Court also publishes all adopted and proposed rule changes for the rules of civil procedure. They're the ones responsible for creating the rules of civil procedure. And so if anyone's interested in researching how court rules have changed or might change in terms of the Colorado Rules of Civil Procedure, this is a great place to go. If you're researching other state court rules, I would recommend starting with the state court website. Many state courts are very good. Supreme Courts in general, with providing some links to court rules at least. And you may find links to other resources through the court website that will get you to any other applicable rules you're looking for. Also, just a note about Colorado, all courts have local rules. Local rules are often available if they are available online on that judicial district website. A couple of districts, as you can see here, are available on Lexis. Some judges also have rules specific to their courtrooms. So if you have a patron who's specifically concerned with court rules, I would draw their attention to the fact that there might be applicable local court rules and judge specific rules, and check the website if they're not available there, and they are a pro se patron, for example, I would recommend that they contact the court to find additional information about any local rules that might apply. Similar to court rules, court forms are another thing that are mostly going to apply to pro se patrons. However, this is kind of a more touchy subject than court rules. It kind of ventures into the arena of potentially providing legal advice, which I know Deb gave a presentation in last month, and in her presentation, she talks a lot about this distinction. So I would recommend listening to that presentation as well if you have not. But for court forms and specifically, you definitely don't want to be in a position where you're recommending a particular form as the thing that a person should file to achieve a particular legal goal. So with court forms, just stick to, providing locations where they can locate for court forms, and kind of let them know that these are options, and that if they still have questions about what court form is appropriate, they should attempt potentially to contact the court or to contact an attorney. One nice thing is that the Colorado State Judicial Department has official forms for a number of filings. These are called Judicial Department forms, JDF forms, and they're all available on the state court's website, which is linked to here. And those are officially published and approved by the Colorado State Supreme Court. So if someone can find their applicable form there, that's a great place for them to start in Colorado State Court. The Denver Public Library, and I'm guessing a number of other public libraries, have access to Gale legal forms and other legal form options. The Colorado Bar Association also sells access to BRAD forms, which I have a link to here. So if someone's looking for more in-depth legal forms, you could direct them there as starting places. Another starting place is the Colorado Practice Series, which is available in print and on Westlaw. I left the other states blank here in the end. I did some research on locating forms for other states. The Gale Legal Forms obviously does have some universal forms available. But the tricky thing, again, this goes back to the dangers of recommending forms about other states, is kind of difficult to tell unless a state court is publishing the forms, how authoritative they are. And so I would recommend, if someone's looking again for other state court forms, direct them to state court websites if there are forms available there. If there are not, I would recommend directing them to a law library who's going to be able to better differentiate the authoritative sources of different forms. I listed here another form that likely comes up potentially for patrons are real estate forms, which the Colorado State Department of Real Estate does publish forms online. So that could be a useful link that's not exactly a court form. So now on to local law and how it's different. Local law is made by municipalities, typically compiled in what's called a municipal code, which is a collection of municipal ordinances passed typically by a city council. There's no single clearinghouse for all municipal codes in the country or even in the state. There's no single publisher of municipal codes. So if you are looking for municipal codes, you're kind of going to have to search around depending on the municipality. Also, another thing that people may ask for in conjunction with municipal codes are land use codes. This applies to the zoning and planning for a municipality and includes zoning ordinances. And it just varies by municipality whether those land use codes are included and published in a municipal code or not, or included separately, published by someone separately. So this can be a kind of tricky area of research, but sometimes you'll get lucky and a municipality will be very good about listing on a website where their codes can be accessed. That's not always the case. So I have listed here some of the bigger publishers of municipal codes. MuniCode covers a number of jurisdictions in Colorado. Code Publishing also covers another number of Colorado jurisdictions. Sterling Codifiers has the Colorado Springs Municipal Code. These other two are major nationwide publishers of municipal codes, and each of these websites are links to where these codes are available for free online. So you can go to each website and search for your particular municipality of interest and hopefully find the applicable code there. If you don't, again, like I said, I would recommend starting with the municipality's website. Some municipalities even publish them separately there. And if you can't find it there, this Municipal Code of Beginners Guide is a great guide for understanding how to read municipal codes. It's also very useful for finding additional resources for municipal codes if you're still at a loss for finding one. And I guess we do have a poll related to this one as well. So I was just wondering if you guys were familiar with any of these municipal code publishers prior to today. Cool, awesome. I actually didn't know I didn't know specifically about general code and code publishing before I was doing research for this. So that was really useful for me as well. And it's amazing the breadth of publishers out there for municipal codes. So I highly recommend, you know, checking those out if you have some free time. It's kind of crazy how extensive some of these code databases are. So if we go back to the PowerPoint, I also wanted to know, I'm gonna just pull up real quick before we start our next poll, actually. Sorry, Christine. Because I would also like to know which of these secondary sources your library has access to, so that I can kind of get an idea of which ones to talk about more in depth. All right, awesome. So it looks like most people have law dictionaries, so we won't talk about that too much, and I'll try to highlight the content of each of these other items so that if people are looking for them, you might be able to understand where to direct them and what they're looking for. These are all secondary sources that are likely to be available from a law library, and all of them, with the exception of Hein Online, which is only available, I think, from the CU Law Library, are going to be available at all the law libraries in Colorado and going to be accessible to the public. So I listed up here a couple of free online resources first. So secondary sources are going to be useful for pro se patrons, especially if they are trying to research just background on a particular legal principle. But a number of other patrons might be looking for information from secondary sources, because secondary sources are really more targeted at explaining rules of law, or trying to make projections about the evolution of the law, or just discussing premises. And so other researchers might be extensively interested in these as well. Law review articles in particular are articles written by professors and attorneys and submitted for publication in journals that are published by law schools and bar associations. And they're meant to be kind of an academic analysis of the law. So people who are doing more general research on the law probably going to be interested in law review articles. And law review articles can be accessed through Google Scholar, just a general Google search. Many are published now on online websites for the particular law review. So if somebody has a more recent law review citation, if you're looking for the exact article, it may very well be available online for free. Memos and attorney websites are sources for more practical analysis of the implications of the law. And so a lot of people who are just trying to understand, like, what the process for a divorce is, or what happens when Child Protective Services gets involved in a case. That just kind of like very general basic background information can often be found through web searches. And of course, I have the caveat here that, attorney websites are also promotional materials, but generally they're using the web as a way to advertise their expertise. And so I would certainly say if someone has the most basic questions about procedure and kind of what happens next kind of questions, those aren't bad places to start, especially if you don't have access to other resources readily available. There are a huge volume of print and digital subscription resources. Since you guys all have access to law dictionaries, I won't talk too much about that. Obviously, if somebody's looking for the meaning of a legal term, that's where you would go. Legal treatises and legal encyclopedias are kind of the summary resources. Legal encyclopedias in particular are targeted at kind of summarizing the law on particular issues. Corpus Juris Secundum and American Jurisprudence are the two primary legal encyclopedias. So if someone comes to you with a citation from one of those, that's what those are, and they are certainly available at any of the local law libraries. Legal treatises is a pretty expansive topic that covers basically any secondary source publication that's meant to be kind of a comprehensive overview of a particular area of law. So legal encyclopedias kind of cover everything. Legal treatises focus on a particular area of law and delve a little more in depth to give you an analysis of what the law is. And typically, both treatises and encyclopedias are covering nationwide these principles nationwide, so they're not going to be specific to Colorado. This is also true for the restatement. Restatements are published in a series. They cover a particular area of law, and they're meant to be kind of like a uniform statement of what the law is or should be in a particular area. And this is especially helpful for statements made in case law, because obviously statutes, you have your universal summary of what the law is, but case law can be a little more difficult to parse, so that's where restatements come in. And all of these are more of a nationwide overview. So if someone is looking for Colorado specific materials, the main treatise on all areas of Colorado law is the Colorado Practice Series. If someone's actually involved in litigation or transactional matter and representing themselves, I would highly recommend that resource. Again, that's going to be available at any of the law libraries in the state. Similarly, if they're interested in purchasing their own materials, Colorado Bar Association has a number of materials. Law libraries will have some of those as well, or they can look online and purchase their own. Textbooks as well are something that, you know, might be useful. They'll be available at law libraries. Hein Online, I'll just briefly mention as a subscription resource that like I said, I'm pretty sure that CU has some access for public patrons. And this site is a really great collection of state statutes and legislative history information. It also is a great resource for law journals and law review articles. I am not exactly sure on the extent of their subscription for public access, so it might just relate to statutes and legislative history and not include access to other secondary source materials. But it is a very, very useful resource if if you're kind of running out of options in these other locations. And with that in mind, I kind of wanted to recommend.
I'm gonna interrupt
Yeah.
just really quickly. Kat had a question about adoption
Oh,
under this group, and I wasn't sure, Kat, if you were referring to a specific resource or sort of like just the state and local resources. I just wanted to make sure that we addressed it before we moved on.
yeah. Yeah, so I'll briefly go back to the forms section. So um, that's typically a court process. And Deb just posted a link to the adoption self-help page, which is perfect starting place. And there are a number of JDF forms that site directs you to.
Perfect, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so, similarly to that question right there, when to direct patrons to a law library. Oftentimes someone with a pro se patron with more basic questions about litigation process and information, you'll have access to free information to give to them. But this are some kind of basic guidelines for when you're probably not going to have the access into the information, or things are maybe trending too far toward the legal advice category for you to feel comfortable answering their question. Historical legal research, obviously, as I mentioned when I was talking about regulations and statutes, a number of that information pre-2000s or pre-mid-90s is not available online. So you're probably going to have to direct them to a law library, or, depending on the historical research, the state archives. When they need access to legal databases, particularly for case law research. If they have a particular secondary source need, or you're just thinking that like a broader legal treatise or other secondary sources, probably what they're going to be looking for. However, I will note that a number of kind of these legal databases and historical research information is probably not available through interlibrary loan from law libraries, but a lot of the secondary sources typically are. And so I would recommend checking on Prospector and on WorldCat to see if anything that might be useful might be available through interlibrary loan, particularly if it's a patron who would have to travel a long way to get to one of our law libraries. Forms not available online. That's kind of self-evident. And again, if you're feeling pressured to give some kind of legal advice, or feel like someone's asking to intricate or specific questions for you to be able to answer, I think that is a perfect time to at least direct them to a law library. Again, Deb's presentation talked more in depth about that and talked about other resources you can direct them to as well if you're concerned about that issue. It also illuminated our local law libraries and how patrons can access those. So if you have questions about that, again, I would refer to the link to her presentation. And finally, I just kind of created a poll here with those in mind, with those kind of examples in mind. Which of the following may need the resources of a law library? And I think there's certainly an argument to be made for all of the above. But there's also, it just kind of provided this also to give you some guidance on using your own professional judgment on the matter, because obviously a pro se patron who's looking for general information on divorce in Colorado may just need the self-help guide on divorce proceedings on the Colorado court's website, or they may just need even more basic, some direction to some web searches and attorney websites that discuss procedure, or they may need something much more in depth that would have to come from a legal treatise. And I think that can be said for most of these, the only one I would say that probably is a pretty clear one is someone researching the history of a regulation before 2003. Like I mentioned during the regulation slide, unfortunately, unless you're lucky enough to have some of that information readily available at your library, it's not available most places. And so they would have to go to the Supreme Court Law Library or the CU Law Library to get that information. But otherwise, all of these could be questions that require direction to a law library, or they could be questions that you can find some resources to help people out with on your own. So does anyone have any additional questions or anything I didn't cover that you'd like me to talk about?
And while Kat is typing, can you just remind us what a pro se patron is? I know Deb went through it. I just gave a brief definition in the first session, but just in case somebody missed it. Oh,
sure. Yeah, perfect. Okay,
Kat,
great. Yes, sorry about that, and sorry about the typo in my pro se patron here on the page. So pro se patrons are people who are representing themselves in litigation. The pro se party is what they refer to in court. So the patron part obviously is because they're visiting you at the library. And they are either representing themselves in litigation, or you can also refer to them as someone who's representing themselves in a transactional matter as well sometimes. And I think that, and Deb can maybe speak to this a little bit more, and she, I know, touched on it on her presentation, but are typically going to be the most demanding patrons that visit a public library looking for legal information, and probably the most challenging to handle, because obviously they're trying to deal with a particular legal matter and represent themselves, which can be an incredibly difficult and challenging thing to do. So that's why we bring them up so much in these types of presentations, I think. And I think maybe Deb's contributing a little bit to my insight, since obviously I work in a law firm library, so I don't deal with pro se patrons so much anymore. I did when I worked at the DU Law Library for a while. Yeah, that's a good point. Deb reprimanded you, mentioned you may also see the term self-represented litigant, which is essentially the same thing. So anything else?
I do not have any additional questions. Kat, hopefully we touched on some of the things that you were hoping to get out of this session. And we do have a couple minutes left, so if there's something else you were looking for, we can probably try to address it. Excellent. And I'm going to add a lot of the websites also to the CSL in Session website itself. So I'll go into my wrap-up slides. Hopefully within an hour, the archive of this session, as well as the resources, will be posted. If either of you need a certificate, I'm going to pop my email into the chat. And you can shoot me an email and let me know that you attended, and I'd be happy to get you a certificate. And we do also have a survey. Kat and Deb can both take it if you want to let us know what you thought about today's session, or if you had other topics that you wanted to see us address in CSL in Session. So if there are no other additional questions, I am going to thank Kesley for providing such an in-depth coverage over all of the state and local resources. I think the archive of this webinar will be hopefully of great help for public librarians who are working in public libraries moving forward. So I thank her and the Colorado Association of Law Libraries for contacting me about providing this series. And we have the next installation